What if the very thing you're trying to escape, the pain, the pressure, the suffering, is the exact force shaping you into someone exceptional? What if comfort is the enemy and suffering is the teacher? Suffering is not a glitch in life, it's built into it. And while most people try to numb it, escape it, or resent it, a rare few confront it directly. Those people don't just survive, they transform. This is about why suffering, when faced consciously, forges strength, clarity, and meaning. Suffering strips away illusion with a precision that comfort never could. When life is smooth and predictable, it allows us to believe stories about ourselves and the world that feel reassuring but remain untested. We tell ourselves that we are in control. That effort always guarantees reward. That fairness is a built-in feature of existence, and that we are entitled to certain outcomes simply because we have followed the rules. These beliefs feel harmless when nothing challenges them. But suffering arrives as a corrective force. It does not negotiate with illusion, it dismantles it. Pain has a way of exposing the gap between what we assume and what is actually true. When things fall apart, the belief in control collapses first. You realize that no amount of planning can eliminate uncertainty. Health can fail, relationships can fracture, and opportunities can disappear despite your best intentions. This realization is destabilizing, but it is also clarifying. You are forced to confront reality as it is, not as you hoped it would be. And while that confrontation is uncomfortable, it is the beginning of wisdom. Suffering also dismantles the myth of fairness. Many people carry an unspoken contract with life. If I behave well, work hard, and follow the rules, I will be protected from deep pain. When suffering violates that contract, anger and confusion often follow. But the contract was imaginary to begin with. Life was never fair in the way we wanted it to be. Recognizing this truth is painful, but it frees you from the endless resentment that comes from expecting reality to operate according to your preferences. Entitlement dissolves under pressure as well. Comfort allows entitlement to grow quietly. It convinces you that certain standards of ease, recognition, or success are owed to you. Suffering interrupts that narrative. When pain arrives, it does not ask what you deserve and asks what you can endure. In that moment, entitlement becomes irrelevant. What matters is capacity, your ability to bear difficulty without surrendering your integrity. As illusions fall away, priorities rearrange themselves. The trivial loses its hold. The superficial fades. In suffering, you discover what truly matters because everything else becomes unsustainable. You learn which relationships are real, which values are non-negotiable, and which goals were distractions rather than callings. Pain narrows your focus, forcing you to distinguish between what is essential and what was merely convenient. This narrowing is not a loss, it is a refinement. It reveals character. Character is what remains when external supports are removed. It is how you act when no one is watching, when outcomes are uncertain, and when excuses are plentiful. Suffering tests character relentlessly. It asks whether you will tell the truth when lying would be easier, whether you will act responsibly when blaming would feel justified, and whether you will continue forward when retreat seems reasonable. The exceptional are not those who avoid suffering. They are those who allow suffering to refine them rather than deform them. When pain strips away illusion, they do not rush to rebuild comforting lies. They tolerate the uncertainty long enough for something stronger to emerge. That tolerance requires courage. It requires the willingness to admit ignorance, vulnerability, and limitation without collapsing in despair. There is a temptation when illusions collapse to become cynical. Cynicism is a defensive posture. It says, nothing matters, so nothing can hurt me. But cynicism is just another illusion, one that pretends detachment is strength. True strength is the willingness to remain engaged with life even after illusions have been shattered. The exceptional do not retreat into bitterness. They step forward with clarity. Character is not something you claim, it is something you demonstrate under pressure. Every moment of suffering presents a choice. You can cling to false narratives, or you can accept reality. You can resent the loss of illusion, or you can use it as an opportunity to see more clearly. Over time, these choices accumulate. They shape who you also humbles. It dismantles inflated self-images and exposes dependency. You realize that you are not as self-sufficient as you imagined, and that realization can be unsettling. But humility is not humiliation. It is accuracy. It places you in proper relationship with reality. From that accurate position, growth becomes possible. Once illusion is stripped away, values must be re-examined. What do you stand for when standing is difficult? What principles survive when they cost you something? These questions cannot be answered in theory. They are answered in action under stress. And the answers reveal the substance of your character. This process is not quick. Illusions often die slowly. The mind resists their collapse because they once provided comfort and certainty. But every time suffering contradicts an illusion and you choose truth over comfort, the grip of illusion weakens. What replaces it is not optimism, but realism. Realism is far more durable. The exceptional understand that suffering is not merely an obstacle to overcome, but a filter. It removes what is unnecessary, false, and fragile. What remains is leaner, stronger, and more aligned. That alignment is what allows a person to move forward with confidence even in uncertainty. When character emerges from suffering, it carries authority. Not the loud authority of dominance, but the quiet authority of someone who has been tested and did not turn away. Others sense this. They trust it. They are drawn to it because it is rare in a world that often avoids discomfort at all costs. In the end, suffering does not guarantee growth. Many suffer and become bitter. What makes the difference is the will and illusion die without letting meaning die with it. When you allow suffering to strip away what is false, you are left with something real, and what is real can be strengthened, refined, and built upon. That is why suffering, when faced honestly, separates the exceptional from the ordinary. Not because the exceptional are immune to pain, but because they allow pain to reveal truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. It becomes the foundation of a life built not on illusion, but on character. Suffering forces responsibility in a way that nothing else can. When life is comfortable, responsibility can be postponed, delegated, or disguised. You can afford to believe that circumstances will improve on their own, that someone else will intervene, or that time will quietly resolve what you refuse to face. But when life becomes unbearable, when the pain is persistent, the pressure unrelenting, and the stakes undeniable, those illusions collapse. Excuses lose their power because they no longer relieve the weight you are carrying. At that point, there are only two paths left: take responsibility or collapse under the burden. Collapse does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like withdrawal, bitterness, cynicism, or numbness. Sometimes it looks like endless complaining disguised as insight. These responses may feel justified, and often they are understandable, but they do not restore order. They do not move life forward. They leave you at the mercy of circumstances, waiting for relief that may never arrive. Responsibility, by contrast, does something radical. It gives you something to do. When suffering intensifies, the question why is for some fair becomes less useful with every passing day. That question keeps you oriented toward resentment. It looks backward, searching for explanations that cannot undo what has already happened. Responsibility shifts the orientation entirely. It asks, given that this is happening, what must be done now? That question does not deny injustice, but it refuses to be paralyzed by it. It pulls you out of victimhood and into action. This shift is subtle but transformative. The moment you ask what must be done, you reclaim agency. Agency does not mean control over outcomes. It means control over response. Even in the most constrained circumstances, there is always some response available, some attitude to adopt, some action to take, some standard to uphold. Responsibility identifies that narrow space of influence and expands it through action. Suffering strips away the luxury of passivity. When the cost of an action becomes greater than the cost of effort, responsibility becomes unavoidable. This is why suffering often precedes growth. Growth requires discomfort, and suffering supplies it in concentrated form. It demands a response. The exceptional are not those who avoid this demand. They are those who meet it willingly. Responsibility turns chaos into structure by breaking overwhelming experience into manageable obligations. Chaos feels infinite because it lacks boundaries. Responsibility imposes boundaries. It says, this is my task. This is what I will carry. By defining what is yours to bear, responsibility reduces the psychological weight of suffering. You may still be burdened, but you are no longer lost. There is a stabilizing effect that comes from doing what must be done, even imperfectly. Small acts of responsibility, keeping commitments, telling the truth, maintaining order in your immediate environment, send a signal to the psyche that you are still capable. That signal counters despair. Despair tells you that nothing you do matters. Responsibility proves otherwise. Those who become exceptional do not wait until they feel strong before taking responsibility. They take responsibility and become strong as a result. Strength is not the prerequisite, it is the byproduct. Each act of responsibility reinforces competence. Each completed task, however small, restores a measure of confidence. Over time, these measures accumulate into resilience. Suffering also clarifies priorities. When life hurts, trivial concerns lose their grip. You stop wasting energy on appearances, comparisons, and distractions. Responsibility directs attention to what's essential. What needs to be protected? What needs to be repaired? What must be endured? These questions sharpen focus and eliminate noise. Responsibility is demanding because it removes excuses, but it is also liberating because it removes helplessness. Helplessness is one of the most corrosive psychological states. It convinces you that effort is futile and that outcomes are predetermined. Responsibility contradicts that narrative. It insists that your actions, while limited, are still meaningful. There is also an ethical dimension to responsibility under suffering. When you choose responsibility, you choose to act in accordance with values rather than emotions alone. Emotions fluctuate wildly under pain. Values endure. Acting on values provides continuity when feelings are unstable. This continuity is what allows a person to remain upright when everything else feels uncertain. Responsibility does not guarantee success, it guarantees engagement. And engagement is what prevents suffering from turning into despair. A person who is engaged, even in struggle, remains oriented toward the future. A person who disengages becomes trapped in the present pain. Exceptional people are often misunderstood because their response to suffering does not align with common expectations. They are not necessarily optimistic or cheerful. They are steady. They do not dramatize their pain, nor do they deny it. They acknowledge it and then ask what must be done despite it. This quiet resolve is often mistaken for coldness, but it is discipline. Responsibility also fosters dignity. There is dignity in carrying a burden voluntarily. Even when the burden is imposed, choosing how to carry it matters. Dignity arises from the knowledge that you did not surrender your agency even under pressure. That knowledge becomes a source of inner stability. As responsibility becomes habitual, suffering changes its role. It no longer feels like an enemy to be avoided at all costs. It becomes a signal, a call to attention. It asks where structure is lacking, where effort is needed, where growth is required. This reframing does not romanticize pain, but it makes it intelligible. The exceptional do not believe that life will become easy if they take responsibility. They believe they've become capable enough to endure life as it is. That belief is realistic and sustainable. It does not depend on favorable circumstances. It depends on character. Responsibility also strengthens relationships. A person who takes responsibility does not outsource their emotional regulation or moral decisions. They become reliable. Reliability builds trust. Trust creates stability in families and institutions. In this way, responsibility under suffering has effects far beyond the individual. Ultimately, suffering forces a reckoning. You cannot remain neutral indefinitely. You either accept the burden of responsibility or allow the weight of chaos to decide for you. Those who become exceptional choose the burden, not because it is pleasant, but because it is purposeful. When you start asking why life is unfair and start asking what must be done, you move from complaint to competence. You turn pain into instruction. You transform chaos into structure, one responsible act at a time. And in doing so, you do not merely survive suffering, you are shaped by it into someone stronger, steadier, and more capable than you were before. Suffering expends capacity in a way that comfort never can. When life remains within familiar boundaries, your sense of what you can endure stays narrow and largely untested. You may believe you know your limits, but those limits are often assumptions rather than facts. Pain challenges those assumptions. It presses against the edges of your tolerance and asks a difficult question. Can you remain conscious, ethical, and engaged when the weight increases? Yes, even imperfectly, your capacity expands. Enduring pain consciously is the key distinction. Unconscious suffering overwhelms and fragments. Conscious suffering, by contrast, is suffering observed, processed, and integrated. It requires attention and restraint. Instead of reacting impulsively or numbing yourself, you stay present. You notice what the pain of your thoughts, emotions, and behavior. This awareness creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, growth becomes possible. At first, pain feels like an invasion. It disrupts routines, destabilizes identity, and exposes vulnerability. The instinctive response is resistance, an attempt to escape, suppress, or deny the experience. But when escape is not possible, endurance becomes the only viable option. Endurance is not passive resignation. It is active engagement with difficulty over time. It is the willingness to stay upright under pressure. As you endure, something subtle begins to change. The pain does not necessarily diminish, but your relationship to it does. What once felt intolerable becomes familiar. Familiarity reduces fear. Fear amplifies pain. Understanding moderates it. This shift marks the beginning of expanded capacity. You are no longer consumed by the experience, you are carrying it. Each carried burden strengthens psychological muscle. Just as physical resistance training increases strength by stressing tissue beyond its comfort zone, suffering increases resilience by stressing emotional and cognitive systems. The process is not comfortable, but it is adaptive. Over time, your nervous system learns that it can survive intensity without collapse. That learning is transformative. Expanded capacity manifests in emotional strength. Emotions that once overwhelmed you, grief, disappointment, fear, become manageable. You still feel them, often deeply, but they no longer dictate your behavior. This emotional regulation is not suppression, it is integration. The emotion is acknowledged and contextualized rather than acted out impulsively. Depth is another byproduct of suffering. Depth arises from complexity, the ability to hold multiple truths simultaneously. Suffering introduces contradictions that simplistic narratives cannot accommodate. You learn that life can be meaningful and painful at the same time, that people can be flawed and worthy, that hope can coexist with grief. This complexity deepens understanding and reduces judgment. As capacity expands, so does empathy. Endured suffering attunes you to the struggles of others. You recognize pain not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. This recognition does not necessarily make you sentimental, but it makes you accurate. You understand that resilience is hard won and that everyone carries burdens unseen. Such understanding is essential for leadership. Leadership is fundamentally about bearing weight. It requires the ability to hold responsibility, uncertainty, and conflict without transferring that weight destructively onto others. A leader with limited capacity collapses under pressure or displaces stress through control, aggression, or avoidance. A leader with expanded capacity absorbs pressure and responds thoughtfully. Wisdom emerges from this capacity. Wisdom, the accumulation of information, it is the ability to apply understanding under pressure. It involves discernment, patience, and perspective. Suffering refines the qualities by forcing you to confront consequences, limitations, and trade-offs. Each endured hardship adds texture to judgment. Suffering also clarifies values. When endurance is required, superficial values fall away. What remains are principles sturdy enough to support action in adversity. These principles guide decisions when clarity is scarce. Over time, they become internalized standards that do not depend on external validation. There is a paradox at the heart of expanded capacity. By accepting vulnerability, you become stronger. Denying vulnerability narrows capacity because it restricts engagement. Accepting vulnerability widens capacity because it allows you to remain present in uncertainty. Presence is power in difficult circumstances. As capacity grows, perspective shifts. You realize that many situations you once avoided are survivable. This realization reduces avoidance and increases courage. Courage, in this context, is not fearlessness but willingness. You are willing to act despite fear because you trust your ability to endure discomfort. Expanded capacity also stabilizes identity. When identity is built on external conditions, success, approval, comfort, it is fragile. Suffering disrupts these conditions and exposes fragility. Enduring that disruption forces identity to root itself more deeply in values and character rather than circumstances. This rooted identity is less reactive and more consistent. Over time, suffering becomes less about appearance and more about refinement. You begin to recognize patterns in how difficulty affects you. You notice habitual reactions and can adjust them. This self-knowledge increases efficiency, less energy is wasted on resistance, and more is directed toward constructive response. Expanded capacity does not eliminate pain. It alters scale. Pain becomes a part of a larger psychological landscape rather than the entire terrain. This proportionality allows you to function effectively even when suffering persists. Functionality under pressure is a hallmark of maturity. Those with expanded capacity often become anchors in turbulent environments. Their steadiness provides reassurance, not because they have all the answers, but because they can remain composed when answers are unclear. This composure is contagious. It calms others and creates space for collective problem solving. Suffering also teaches patience. Endurance unfolds over time. There are no shortcuts. This temporal aspect trains you to respect process and resist impulsive solutions. Patience enhances judgment and reduces error, particularly in complex situations where immediate action may be counterproductive. As capacity expands, gratitude often emerges, not for the pain itself, but for the strength gained through it. This gratitude is quiet and grounded. It recognizes that while suffering is unwelcome, its transformative potential is real. This recognition does not romanticize hardship, it contextualizes it. Ultimately, expanded capacity is the foundation of wisdom because wisdom requires the ability to hold reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. Reality is complex, uncertain, and often painful. A narrow capacity demands simplification or denial. A wide capacity accommodates complexity without fragmentation. Leadership, wisdom, and resilience all rest on this ability. They are not granted. They are built through sustained engagement with difficulty. Suffering, endured consciously, stretches the psyche until it can bear more truth, more responsibility, and more uncertainty. In this way, suffering does not merely test you, it enlarges you. What once overwhelmed you becomes manageable. What once frightened you becomes familiar. And what once threatened to break you, the very force that strengthens your capacity to live fully and responsibly in a demanding world. Suffering does not make you exceptional automatically. Resentment makes them fragile. But responsibility transforms pain into power. If you face suffering honestly, integrate its lessons, and carry your burden with dignity, you don't just endure life, you rise above it.